Have you ever wondered what Earth would look like if it had rings? Just like Saturn? Imagine looking up at the night sky, and instead of the usual stars and moon, you'd see massive glowing arcs stretching across the horizon. Pretty cool, right? But it wouldn't just be a pretty view. It would change everything about how we live on Earth. Now here's something to think about. Earth's rings wouldn't just hang up there like some cosmic decoration. They'd be huge, made of billions of tiny ice and rock particles floating around in space. If you think the moon has a big effect on our planet, wait until we throw rings into the mix. These rings could even affect the weather, our climate, and how we get around the planet. First off, let's talk about what it might actually look like. Picture standing outside at night. The rings would be massive, visible both during the day and the night. Depending on where you live, the view would be different. Near the equator, you'd see the rings as a giant band arching high overhead. Near the poles, they'd look more like a glowing halo. No matter where you are, you'd probably want to snap a million photos of the sky. But don't forget to look down once in a while, because those rings might be hiding more surprises than you think. You might be wondering, how would these rings even form? Would they just pop up one day? Well, if Earth suddenly had rings, it would likely be because something dramatic happened, like a moon-sized object colliding with Earth, breaking apart and forming a debris field around our planet. Kind of like a cosmic demolition derby, except the leftovers don't just disappear, they form these beautiful rings. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Earth's rings could block sunlight in certain areas, meaning some parts of the planet might get a little colder. Ever felt like winter lasted forever? Well, that might actually happen in some places. The rings could act like a giant cosmic sunscreen, shading parts of the Earth. You might need to pack extra sweaters if you're planning a vacation near the poles. But the rings wouldn't just mess with the weather, they could also mess with time. Well, not time exactly, but how we measure it. You see, without the moon, Earth's tilt and rotation might become a little wobbly over the centuries. This means our seasons could shift, making summer and winter last longer or shorter, depending on where you live. It's like Mother Nature is constantly changing the channel, and you never quite know what season will come next. So, what about space travel? You might be thinking, hey, could we use the rings to our advantage? Maybe build some cool space elevator or something? Well, not so fast. Flying through those rings would be like dodging a hailstorm in space. And trust me, you wouldn't want to be caught in the middle of that. Tiny chunks of rock and ice zipping around at thousands of miles per hour? Yeah, that's not something your average spaceship could handle. So, while the rings look awesome, they might put a little bit of a damper on our future space adventures. Let's not forget the animals. Believe it or not, wildlife could get confused by the rings. Birds, for example, navigate using the stars. Now imagine if their sky maps had a giant ring blocking their view. Some species might get lost or migrate in the wrong direction. And who knows how the rings might mess with other natural cycles we've come to rely on? It could be a wild ride for nature too. Now, as we're picturing all this, you're probably realizing that life on Earth would be pretty different with rings. And if you're into cool, mind-blowing ideas like this, why not subscribe to our channel? If you're loving these what-if scenarios, we've got a lot more where this came from. Back to the rings. There's another cool thing we haven't talked about yet, solar eclipses. Normally, when the moon moves between the Earth and the sun, we get a solar eclipse. It's already amazing, right? But if we had rings, eclipses would be on a whole new level. When the sun shines through the rings, we might see beautiful light patterns on the ground, kind of like those cool shadows you see when light passes through a window with blinds. Every eclipse would be like a dazzling light show in the sky. But like most things, having rings wouldn't be all fun and games. They could cause some problems. One big issue? Space debris. The same particles that make the rings could come crashing down to Earth from time to time. Imagine tiny meteors constantly raining down. Sure, they'd mostly burn up in the atmosphere, but a few might make it through. Nothing too crazy, but let's just say you'd probably hear a lot more about meteor impacts on the news. And speaking of things coming down from space, the rings themselves wouldn't last forever. Over millions of years, they'd start to lose material. Some of it would fall to Earth, while other particles might get knocked out of orbit by space rocks. Eventually, Earth's rings could disappear altogether, and we'd be left with just memories and a ton of pictures. Another wild thought: the rings might even change how we live on Earth. For example, agriculture might need to adapt. Certain crops could get less sunlight because of the rings, which might mean farmers would need to change how and where they grow food. Some areas might become colder, others hotter. Imagine trying to predict the weather when giant rings are casting shadows all over the place. Let's not forget about tides. Right now, our tides are controlled by the moon's gravity. But if Earth had rings, those tides could get a little unpredictable. You might find the ocean acting weird, with tides being higher or lower than usual, depending on where the rings are casting their shadows. So if you live near the coast, you might want to invest in some extra flood insurance, just in case. Okay, we've talked a lot about the possible downsides, but let's get back to the fun part. Imagine how much this would change culture and entertainment. People would be obsessed with the rings. Songs, movies, and books would all be inspired by them. Instead of heading to the beach to watch the sunset, people might gather to watch the rings light up in the sky. You could even have ring festivals, where cities turn off their lights to let the rings shine brighter. And speaking of festivals, think about the tourism. Everyone would want to visit places with the best views of the rings. Certain cities might become famous just for their night skies. Hotels with rooftop views of the rings? Totally booked all year round. The whole travel industry might change just because of how much people would want to see this cosmic wonder. In the end, having rings around Earth would be one of the biggest game changers in human history. From the weather, to wildlife, to even how we celebrate life, everything would shift. Would it be for better or worse? Well, that's up for debate. But one thing's for sure, Earth would never be the same again. And honestly, isn't that what makes ideas like this so exciting? It's not just about what's happening right now, but thinking about how one little change could turn everything upside down. If you're as fascinated by this as we are, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more mind-blowing what-if scenarios.